So how does self-responsibility coincide with God reliance?
Good question.
Excellent question.
Yeah. What's the answer?
Yes, have a go.
Well, no, my problem is that I keep thinking I need to be self-responsible, take responsibility for what I do, not be a bother to others or a burden or ask others for money or whatever.
Yeah.
By doing that, I'm focusing on I don't need anybody's help, I gotta do it on my own. And I don't know how to say, no, God's gonna help me with that. I can,
Well,
yeah.
Let me have a go before we talk about your. Jesus is going to want to talk about your emotions, but let's just talk about as a principled question, right? Self-responsibility is really my heartfelt desire to know and feel all of my own feelings,
To love yourself.
to love myself, and to embrace my free will in harmony with God, with God's laws, with God's principles, if you like. So that's me being self-responsible. Now, that's, if you like, my job as God's, if I'm going to...
The pinnacle of God's creation.
Yeah, as God's highest creation, that's my potential and really what God desires for me. But there's a lot of space for God in that, if you think about it. Because if I want all of my feelings and I want to embrace my free will in harmony with God's laws, I'm going to seek God's truth. I'm going to want to know God's love is going to help me to understand love, understand law. I'm going to not put onto God responsibility for my feelings.
Or responsibility for anything you're capable of doing yourself.
Yes, because I'll want to experience my capacity as the highest of God's creation, so I can create things. But most of the time people come to God because they want God to fix their feelings.
They want God to do all the things that they don't want to do for themselves.
That feel hard or, frustrating or grief-stricken or all of these things, or hopeless. Or we come to God with those feelings and say, God, help me.
Rescue me.
Which is not God reliance. It's not self-responsible. In fact, once you come to God with the feeling, my feelings are all mine. I can feel them. I can feel
Not just can, but I'm going to have to.
And I want to. They're part of my experience. I want them. That's the first time you can really receive God's love. Because then the love coming as a gift. And you can't really receive love unless you feel it as a gift. And God's not going to try and help you get away from this self-responsible state. So a lot of people think God reliance is like, oh, I'll just hand it all over to God and God will fix all my problems. But that's actually the opposite of God reliance.
Yeah, and whoever tells you what to do then is not God.
It's not God. And whoever helps you out to avoid your own situation. Yeah. God wants you to know that you can deal with your own pain and suffering and create a life of joy and abundance.
And you are responsible for all your sin.
If you like, God's an entity who can love us through that process, who can teach us through that process, but is not going to take over that process or not going to minimize the effort you have to do in that process. Because to do that would be to undermine your potential as his highest creation.
And undermine your free will.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think inherent in your question is a lot of feeling of like, well, how does God help me? If I've got to do all this stuff for myself, what about God? How do I get God's help in this? But really the way you get God's help is by doing the work that is your own and seeking God's wisdom, seeking God's love, seeking God's truth in that process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you want to say?
That was a good answer.
Yeah, good.
Do you get it, Katerina?
Yes, because I want to say now that all my life, my thoughts are when you have a problem, you ask God to fix it.
Yeah, no, when you have a problem, you first try to solve it yourself.
You examine the problem. You need to know what the problem is, don't you?
And why it came about, and what its cause is.
Yeah. So, but that's not... A lot of us want God just to take away the problem without first knowing.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
I mean, that's... That's what I want. I want to ask for God to help me. And
Because
I
you
want
want him to
God
take away the problem without understanding how you created it.
A lot of times we
Yeah.
don't even ask God, what is the problem here? What is the truth about what I've created? Because God wants to help with that.
Yeah.
But a lot of us are like, no, God, just make it go away.
Yeah. And he's not going to do that.
Never.
Ever. He never will make something go away that you do not understand how it got created.
Yeah. And
Because to
I'm
do that
going to
would
put in
be,
the effort to
and not going to put in the effort to fix it.
fix it.
And he can't do that because you will not understand and you will do it again.
Yeah.
You,
And
you need to get to a point where you understand your problems so that you can fix them permanently and you don't do them again. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you take personal responsibility for your problems.
Yeah.
Makes sense? So we go there and there.
I think going off of that, asking God to help you, I could also interpret that as help me help myself. So, or what do you guys think about that?
Well, you could.
Asking God to help you
You got to be
for
careful.
your willingness, or
Well, no, you're in charge of your will. So God can't really go G you up into using your will,
yeah.
because that would be, you'd be creating a dependency then.
Yeah.
If I always needed Jesus to go, come on Mary, you can do it, you're all right.
Cheer squad.
You know,
So you
then
want God as your cheer squad.
every time I hit a problem I'd be like, oh, can you just tell me that I can do it? And that's not me gaining self-responsibility, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you have to be careful as well in the way that we relate to God. Like Katerina was very honest. I want God to take away my problems. It doesn't matter if you come and go, oh God, I realise I have to take responsibility and, you know, could you just give me some truth about this issue? If you really feel like, can you take away my problem? You know, you're better off being honest and examining your
Right.
lack of self-responsibility in that place
Yeah.
than trying to alter your prayer intellectually, if you
Yeah.
like.
So a lot of you try to reframe things with God because you're so used to reframing it with people and you've gotten away with it. And so you go up to a person and you say, oh, I would like you to do that. No, let me restate, would you be able to do this for me? Instead of just saying
Are
directly,
you interested in doing
yeah,
it?
are you interested in doing this? You know, but it was funny when we met early days, Mary and I, we'd be driving along, Mary would want a cup of coffee or something like that. So she'd say to me, do I want one? No.
Yes, I was well trained not to express my desires.
Does that make sense? But that's also not taking responsibility for what your desires actually are, right? Now, so you go to God and say, do you want to do this for me? And God will just go, no. The answer to that will always be no, right? Because we're insincere in the motive of asking, right? And so, of course, the answer is always going to be no. and then people go, oh, I can't feel anything from God. Yeah, that's right, because you're asking all these insincere things, not understanding the principles upon which love is built, upon which the emotion of love flows. And these are all laws that govern the emotion of love and how it flows. And if you don't understand them, then you think, oh, I was loved in my childhood when, you know, whenever I needed rescuing, I just went to Daddy and he rescued me.
That's love.
That's love. And no, and you've grown up, many of you are still, some of you are in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you're still children needing rescue from somebody. But mum and dad have died now, so what do? You feel so alone. Now mum and dad have died, you know, because there's no one to rescue anymore, and now it's up to you. And now your kids even think you should be the one rescuing them. And it's sort of like, but I have enough trouble trying to rescue myself, like, you know. And so we're no longer the pinnacle of God's creation. We're now these little dependent ants, you know, try to have these interactions because we're not seeing ourselves as God sees our capacity. So very important to understand that these principles are very strong principles that should guide life, but every time I break the principle, I'm committing hundreds of sins.
Yeah, and you can see that self-responsibility, when I break that principle or when I don't have that principle inside of me, creates a lot of emotional addiction, a lot of physical addiction, because I'm always seeking someone or something to get me away from what I feel, to get me away from solving my problems. So, yeah, you can see how It creates emotional issues. Sexual, a lot of people get married just because they feel like their partner is going to
Rescue them.
rescue them from their feelings, do the
From
hard things that they don't
Financial
want to do.
safety or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, then you're creating sexual sins.
He loves me so much. He makes me feel good about myself. So what are you really expecting? That the love is going to make you feel good about yourself. No, that's your responsibility. You need to make you feel good about yourself. You understand? No one else should have that responsibility. No one. Because if you put that responsibility on them, now your happiness is dependent upon them making you feel something, not you feeling it.
That's
Right.
not loving.
Out of harmony with love. It's not love. It's a addiction, dependency. So, these principles are so important to grasp. And in 2016, the third assistance group in 2016, if you go to the 2016 downloads on our website, you'll see there was a whole thing about God's loving laws. And that it mentions 17 principles, right? These are sort of fundamental principles that every person on earth should be taught from childhood babies, right? Because they are the governing factors that govern love. They determine whether something's love or not. If you understand those principles, you understand what love is. So when somebody comes along and says, I'll rescue you, instead of seeing it, oh, isn't that lovely? You'll go, that's very unloving. Do you see the difference? Because you recognise the principle. When somebody comes along and says, you've got some lack in your life, so I'm going to give you something to make you feel like you've got more abundance in your life. Right? And somebody comes along and does that, you'll be going, that's not teaching me how to create my own abundance. Out of harmony with the principle. Right? Somebody comes along and says, look, I'll educate you. You go, great. I need education, right? And I'll take on board education that's in harmony with love because my life will benefit because I'm a self-responsible person. And one of the first points of self-responsibility is to educate yourself. Not rely on somebody else to educate you, but you educate yourself. And the problem is on earth today, we're taught that you go to school for the education and then you go perhaps to university if you need to for the education or to an apprenticeship or some other thing to get an education, and then once you stop your education, you're set for life. Now in practice, have many of you found that to be true? Not really, right? But even if you did find it to be true, you're actually not being responsible for your further education. And the very biggest thing you can do is to neglect your own education, right? Because that's an act of irresponsibility. It's very, very irresponsible for us to live on earth and not understand it. The majority of us don't even understand how a tree works. We don't even understand how the earth breathes. We don't understand that if you cut down the trees, you stop the whole breathing mechanism. We don't understand a lot of these things because we've never been educated. We all go, but I wasn't taught that at school. It was too bad. You live in this world, you see the tree, surely you should work out how it works. Surely. And if the science is available to you to discover, surely a part of your developmental process, this is the environment that I'm living in, surely I should understand it.
Well, really anything that we use, we have a responsibility to understand. So our phones even, how many of us even understand how our phones work, or even how to update software on your own computer? All these things are actually things that when we're self-responsible,
You don't get somebody else to do.
Yeah.